Hello and welcome to the Week in Nintendo right here on GVG. I'm your host for this episode, Steve Bowling, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Brandon Miracle.
Hi people, how you doing? Welcome to the podcast where we talk about Nintendo games.
It's been a quieter week in the world of Nintendo, but a good one nonetheless. Before we get started, I want to jump into what we've been playing. My Switch has seen some mileage this week, more than in most recent weeks. Of course, we had Nintendo World Championships. I don't know if you competed in the championship that just ended, Brandon, but I'm pleased to say I got in the top 8%.
I did compete in it. I forgot that results went out on Monday, so I don't know how I did.
Yeah, it's really cool, actually. If you get in the top 20%, you get a badge in the game just saying that you did that. I was hoping that there'd be like a top 10%, top 5%. I'm really glad that there's not like a badge that you can only get if you win overall, because that will just never happen for me. But it is cool that it breaks it out in kind of overall global rankings and then rankings by your birth year. It turns out of all the players that there are, and I think it's probably somewhere safe to say it's like in the 30 to 50,000 mark, because you've seen
50,
numbers. Oh, nice, 50,000. So there's only 2,000 that were born in the same year as me that play this game.
Oh, that's interesting. I would figure that that would have been on the higher end, but I guess this is Nintendo. In the end, kids dominate this market.
Yeah, I want to see where my kids fall, because obviously, they're born much later. And I'm curious to see how big their age bracket is, or how big their specific birth year groups are. But they haven't yet picked up the game. They've seen me play it, and I think that they're a little intimidated by it. I have to say, my best friend has been playing this game, and he's S-ranked literally everything. And I'm just blown away, Lord, because that would take so much time. It's like an absurd amount of dedication, certainly more than I've got currently.
I've seen some people on Twitter also get S ranks on everything. Right now, I have no less than A rank on everything, except for the last Legends Challenge on every game. I've only done the Legends Challenge for Mario 1, Zelda, and Mario 3.
Nice.
I don't have the coins to buy them because they're 300 a pop.
Yeah. I feel like I've bought a lot. I haven't done all the challenges yet. I've been really casual about playing this game. I don't really want to burn through it too quickly, because I'm trying to have it be the stopgap between, nothing and Famicom Detective Club next month. So this is kind of a game that I'm taking at my own pace. Every now and then I'll burn a few challenges, but I will admit too, it drives me nuts. Like, in probably the best possible way, but I will get wound up just trying to get an S rank, and I'm like, come on, I could have done it. If this jump landed perfectly, I would have gotten the S rank. And so some of them I just kind of like keep banging my head against until I get it. I'm definitely not a speedrunner by nature. And one of the things that I really like looking at the championship results is that I can see like the number one ranked person and how they did it. And it's just stuff that I could never do. Like people starting 1-1 with like a backwards jump to get full speed. I'm like, that's just, I'm never going to be that good. I'm never going to reach that height. And I'm happy to just qualify for the S rank. I did see someone in our comments say that an A rank in this game is like a B rank in the real world of speedrunning. And after seeing what actual people are doing, I'm like, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I was feeling that last week when we were talking about it, that I thought A ranks were way too forgiving. But I think there's some psychology involved in that. They don't want players who are new at this to feel like they're bad, because that does not inspire you to keep trying. Not as much as like it would be if, you got a C rank a bunch of times and you're like, oh, well, I guess I'm terrible at this. So you give up. So I think it's smart to do it this way. When you see that golden A, you're like, oh, I can do this. And then you get golden A plus and you're like, oh, I'm getting better. And then you get golden A plus plus and you're like, oh, the ladder keeps climbing. And then eventually you get the S rank and, you got the chance to build up to that. So I think it's smart to do it this way, even if I don't think it's entirely accurate to how speedrunning is.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that there's an element of kind of inaccuracy there, but I agree with you that it's intentional. they don't want to demotivate you from the get-go, right? So you don't want to just log in and they're like, oh yeah, you're terrible and you're you're never going to get better at this. So I think it was smart of them. But I haven't just been playing this. Obviously, Nintendo World Championships came out and we were talking about it on the last episode because we recorded it on the day of release. I'm pleased to say I'm still having fun with it. But I've been playing other stuff too. SNK recently sent over SVC Chaos for me to check out. And if you don't know, that is SNK's answer to Capcom versus SNK. So Capcom versus SNK, widely loved, cherished in the fighting game community. SVC Chaos, not so much. And there's good, valid reasons for that, but people seem to forget that partnership went both ways, right? that the deal was both companies got to make a crossover game. And SVC is certainly the lesser of the two and frequently overshadowed by Capcom's rendition. But it is a fun piece of gaming history to have, and it's cool that we're getting more of these kind of forgotten games on the Switch. I've played through with every character already. Beating a fighting game with every character in story mode takes 20 minutes. So yeah. I've done that, and I've played through it. I imagine this isn't one that you picked up though, right?
No, it's not. Which is not to say that I'm not interested in it, but I don't have as much of a treasured history with fighting games as you do. I didn't grow up in an age where arcades were readily available and, that kind of culture was abound. I also grew up in a neighborhood that was full of old people. So it was just me, and I didn't really have other people to play games with. So a lot of my growing up was playing single player games. I think that's why I treasure multiplayer experiences so much today, because it's just something I didn't get to have growing up. But, I do appreciate that this game is here and that it's been released. It comes out at an interesting time, knowing that we've got we've got Marvel coming out soon as well. I love seeing these old games getting a second chance to shine. If I were to say there's any classic fighting game that I really like, it would be Garo, Mark of the Wolves.
Ooh. So
I'm very excited that Mark of the Wolves, of all entries in that series, is getting a sequel soon. But yeah, I didn't get to really have those experiences, but I'm glad that they're here now, which means I can.
Yeah, it's really cool. And this one's getting a physical edition in Europe, which I'm going to beg John to pick up for me at some point. I think it's great that the Switch is kind of this all-in-one platform, right? For both modern releases and revitalizations of retro games. Like you said, we've got MVC Collection coming, which is incredible. Ash got to play it at EVO. We've got a preview up on the channel for it. But what have you been playing on your Switch this week?
So I am really looking forward to MEO, Famicom Detective Club. And I didn't actually play the two remakes back when they first came out. I bought them. I played them for just a little bit. I started with The Missing Heir and I got stuck relatively early on. I'll say it here. They didn't really touch the gameplay experience for those games, just the visuals and the music and the voice acting. And as far as visual novels go, they're very archaic. And there's a lot of guessing and checking. That's a problem some of the early Ace Attorney games have, where you just have no idea. So you got to throw a dart and see what happens. There's no punishment for that, but it can be kind of hard to navigate because of it.
Yeah.
But I decided that this time, and you can all criticize me if you want, I'm playing with a guide. If I get stuck and I can't figure out how to make the narrative go forward, I just reference the guide, figure out what option I missed, pick that option, and then I can keep going and enjoying the story.
I'm not going to level any criticism your way for that, because I reviewed one of those two games, and one of the things that I felt kind of frustrated by when I was reviewing it, even though I knew that these were remakes of old games, and like you said, the gameplay is untouched. I knew that I could have looked it up, but I feel like that's a disservice as a reviewer. I think if you're reviewing a game, looking up a guide is not something you should do because it changes how you view the game, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that there are valid criticisms to be made about the fact that you feel the need to look up a guide, or that there are obtuse choices that you need to make to move the critical path forward in a game. Those are things that you should note when you're reviewing a game, like, hey, I had to choose this obscure dialogue option at this obscure moment that did not make sense in the context of what I was doing to move the narrative forward. That's not an okay thing. And that is something that I noted when I played these games, owing to the fact that they were made in the 80s. And so, game design has moved forward a lot since then, even within the visual novel space. And so I'm interested to see what Nintendo does with Famicom Detective Club to bring its gameplay forward. Obviously, it's still within the confines of a visual novel setting, so there's only so much you can do. But I hope they're able to maintain the mystery of these games without those moments where you kind of get stuck and you just have to try every option until something works, because I think that takes you out of the narrative a bit.
Yeah, one of the moments I got stuck in even just recently, I'm playing The Girl Who Stands Behind first this time.
Nice.
Which, if you don't know, is the prequel, but it is the second game in the series. So Missing Air is first, Girl Who Stands Behind came out after, but it is the prequel from a narrative standpoint.
Yeah.
There's a moment. Did you play Girl Who Stands Behind, or was it Missing Air?
I reviewed the Missing Air.
Okay. So in Girl Who Stands Behind, there is a teacher that you need to talk to who has information about the Girl Who Stands Behind rumor. And she will not talk to you in the presence of other people. So there's a moment where you're talking to her in the faculty lounge, and there's another teacher in the background, and every time you talk to her, he kind of turns his head to let you know, oh, he's listening in on the conversation, and you need to go somewhere else to talk to her. And I knew where it wanted me to go. I knew the place that it wanted me to take her. And I could not figure out how to initiate moving her to the other place. And when I looked it up, I found I was not the only person who had this problem. It was a very obtuse solution. You had to do a series of conversations between the two teachers in a specific order, then move to the other location. And I think you had to select the think option while you were there so that you could be like, oh, this would be a great place to talk to her. And then you call her. And I'm like, in my brain, I'm like, if I just moved there, shouldn't she just follow me? That was where my brain was going. And I was just completely off base. So I definitely want them to correct stuff like that, which is not to say that it's wrong. It's just obtuse. And, it makes the experience difficult.
Yeah, I can agree with that. There's a moment much like that in the Missing Air in which the player, if you're paying attention, you've likely already figured out what to do next in the narrative, but you have to use a similar inner monologue think option, and then your character realizes what you've known at this point for a long time, and you're like, I feel like my agency was taken away from me here because I, the player, know what I'm supposed to do. I know where the story's going. I know where to go and what, and I feel like that would be a great thing for them to be cognizant of with the Smiling Man, with Emio, that there are going to be moments where maybe the player already knows what the next narrative beat is and they go to the place where that is going to occur. I don't think you should have to fulfill a very obtuse condition to have that story beat kick in. Leave it there as an option. If the player thinks they're like, oh, I should go here. But if you go there already kind of having figured it out, just let the story continue from that point.
And even if they don't do something like that, I think there should at least be an option in the menu to just tell me what to do next. Just a very simple, this is the trigger you missed, go do that.
Yeah, I think that Nintendo has made great strides over the years in terms of, I don't want to say hand-holding the player, but assisting players when they're clearly in need of it. They have those systems in Mario games where if you just die repeatedly, they're like, hey, look, do you want a hand? We'll give you a hand. They did that for Zelda as well. There were some systems in there to explain things to players who are maybe not as experienced. And I think for a game that is not in a genre that's new to Nintendo, but one that maybe Nintendo fans aren't as used to, it would be great to have some of those quality of life features to just say hey, you look like you're stuck. Do you want us to tell you what to do or where to go, and make that offer to the player? Because you can always just say no and continue to try to solve it. Or if you're really just getting frustrated, which is something I experienced with the missing heir, then I probably would have readily accepted that assistance at that point.
Yeah, and I also come with the perspective of having played games like Ace Attorney, the Somnium Files, which is probably my favorite visual novel ever. Um, but those games are modern, or more modern, so they've had time to iron things out like that. These are Famicom games. I'm sure that the programming was very uh, difficult and archaic. Like the level of options that they could have included are not very expansive. It's just a shame that they didn't build on that at all with the remakes.
Yeah, part of me wonders if this was something that they wanted to do to just test the waters, to see if Famicom Detective Club could carry an audience in 2021, 22?
I think it was 21.
Yeah, when these came out. And so, Nintendo may have had the idea that they wanted to revisit this series, but first this was just a test bed, right? To see if these games would perform. And I'm sure that they performed to Nintendo's expectations or higher. From what I understand, they sold way higher than most people would have expected, though I don't have those numbers at hand right now. And so part of me thinks if they were just like, oh, let's just upgrade these and put them out and see how people respond to them. I think the response was probably better than they had hoped, which gave them the courage to make a whole new entry in the series. Obviously, go ahead.
It's also worth noting that The Girl Who Stands Behind, this is the second time it's been remade, because it was remade for the Super Famicom.
Yes.
And I don't know what advancements were made between the NES, or excuse me, the Famicom version and the Super Famicom version. But there was definitely an opportunity to do more here.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that I would love to see what the Super Famicom version of this game was like. I don't know that if, like you said, I'm wholly unfamiliar with the Super Famicom remake other than the fact that I know it exists. I've never played it. I've never played the original Famicom version either, even though I actually own it. Like I have a physical disk system disc for one of the two Famicom games, which I happened to find like in a bargain bin for $4 a long time ago.
We take those.
Yeah, exactly. So I was happy to grab that, but I've never actually used it, even though I have a Famicom and a disk system. But I'm wholly unfamiliar with what improvements, if any, they made beyond visuals, right? And it may just be a simple case of they gave it a new coat of paint and re-released it, but I'm excited to see these games. We're in a really exciting time right now in that we have, we touched on it previously, but you and I have since talked about our most anticipated games this year, where a lot more Nintendo releases came up. But we have MEO coming up, in just about a month from now. We have Zelda coming out right after that. We have Super Mario Party Jamboree coming out after that. And then we have Mario and Luigi Brothership the month after that. I'm really just kind of hyped for like the whole rest of this year.
Yeah, I was thinking about it, like even like spreading outside of just strictly Nintendo or first party games. Like October alone is just packed for somebody like me, because there's Mario Party Jamboree, there's Fantasy Life I, which we're both excited to play, and Dragon Ball Sparking Zero, which we're both excited to play. So October alone is just a big cesspool of video games.
Yeah, it's a good time to be a fan of many things in October. Fantasy Life I'm anticipating that it's just going to swallow me up whole. That is a game, a sequel to a game that is my favorite 3DS game of all time. And I love the 3DS. The 3DS is full of so many different experiences that I've enjoyed having with it. I'm working on a video about all my favorite 3DS games or some of my favorite post-Switch 3DS games. But to say that it's a standout in a platform full of standouts is no exaggeration. Fantasy Life is fantastic. If you've never played it, Fantasy Life I coming out real soon. I strongly recommend it. I haven't played Fantasy Life I, but just seeing it gives me all the right feels. And then, Sparking Zero is also just a massive surprise. I remember playing Tenkaichi 3 on the Wii. And like I did the motion control, Kamehameha, and the Spirit Bomb and stuff, and then I realized I should just switch to a regular controller. But the Sparking Zero is a game that I truly wish was going to come out on the Switch, because I'm so excited to play it, and I'd love to have a portable version.
We've seen Dragon Ball FighterZ as well as Kakarot end up on Switch eventually, so I'm I am confident that we might see it at the very least on the successor to the Switch.
Yeah, and that was something I wanted to talk about today. The Switch successor is obviously, on everyone's mind lately. Uh, I don't really. I wonder if we're going to see some of these third-party games that are currently skipping the current iteration of the Switch make the jump over to the Switch 2 or whatever comes out after the Switch. Nintendo is very keen not to call it like the Switch 2 just yet, but I can't imagine it'll be anything but.
Yeah, I mean, one of the games that I've been fairly confident will make its way to Switch 2 is Monster Hunter Wilds. Monster Hunter and Nintendo have had a very good relationship ever since Tri released on the Wii. You've had Monster Hunter Tri on Wii, Tri Ultimate on Wii U and 3DS. Monster Hunter 4, the entire generation, the fourth gen of Monster Hunter is exclusive to Nintendo platforms. And then Gen 5 was split. You had World and Iceborne on other platforms, and then Rise on Switch, though it did eventually come to other platforms. So I'm kind of hoping the reverse happens with Wilds. I don't know that I would play it on the Switch successor, but given that there's crossplay, I just want as many people as possible to have access to the game.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I'm not the world's biggest Monster Hunter fan. I probably wouldn't even go as far as to call myself a fan of Monster Hunter, though I have played many of the games in the series and found them to be enjoyable experiences. But for me, it's a highly social experience, and I don't really have a circle outside of you that plays Monster Hunter religiously. So it's just something that I think the barrier of entry has become too high for me at this point, to where I feel a bit too intimidated to get into it. However, I did play a lot of Rise, and I started off on the Switch with Monster Hunter Rise, but eventually I got a PC copy gifted to me, and I have to say that I feel like the Switch is a great complementary platform for a game like Monster Hunter, but I can understand the appeal of like high frame rate, great visual fidelity in those games, because it is such a twitchy game in terms of you need to be able to read the actions of that monster and react as quickly as possible. So I do want to have those in like 4K 120 if possible, just to be able to, really, really have the greatest advantage I can when hunting these huge beasts. That being said, though, I could see the Switch as like a great way to take that experience with you on the go. Like if you're as deep into it as you are, Brandon, I can imagine that, if you had cross progression, you would want to pick that up and use it for the times when you're not near a TV, or you just want to play a quick hunt with some friends
100%.
and have that.
I would double dip in a heartbeat if there was cross progression.
Yeah, as I understand it, I don't think Rise currently has cross progression, right?
Rise has no crossplay or cross progression. Wilds will have crossplay and confirmed no cross progression.
That is a shame. I wish that they would fix that. Obviously, I think the Switch 2 is going to be one of those platforms where it would be something that is ideally a complement to having either a gaming PC or another console like a PS5 or a Series X in your house, though the gap will be much narrower than ever before.
Yeah, I think I don't think that Wilds would struggle to run on Switch successor as much as something like Monster Hunter World would, because Monster Hunter World runs on the old Monster Hunter engine, which I don't think changed from 1 all the way till World. So they took that engine as far as they possibly could. Now Wilds is on RE engine, and so was Rise. And there are multiple games that run on RE engine already available on Switch. So I think that's a more malleable, a more compatible engine, easier to optimize for. Because, even speaking outside of the Switch successor, Wilds is a game, and you could say this about all of Capcom's games at this point, is that they're going to want these games available on those portable PC handhelds, Steam Deck, ROG Ally, those types of machines. I think the fact that they exist has increased the chances of other third-party games coming to Switch successor as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. Obviously, Nintendo tapped into something that people have always wanted. I remember being much younger and having the DS, and people talking about wanting a DS2 that could play full console games. I remember very specifically like a very widely distributed mock-up of like an all-metal DS that was running Mario Kart Double Dash on it, with no compromises, and people talking about how if they could get a handheld that could just play Mario Sunshine, that they would be so happy. And we have that now. We have like a handheld that plays full-fledged AAA, no compromises, console quality games. The concept of the portable game is more of like an abstract now than it ever has been. John and I were talking earlier this week just about how there's kind of this delineation between console games and portable games on the Switch, right? Your WarioWares and stuff like that are obviously your portable ideology games. But then you have games like Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, Pokemon Legends that wouldn't exist on like a traditional handheld, despite the fact that the Switch is, first and foremost, at least to me, a handheld system. And there's this interesting idea that, Nintendo has popularized this idea so much that now, we're getting the inevitable wave of, I don't want to call them copycats, but competitors, right? Yeah, your Steam Decks, your ROG allies, like you mentioned. And the idea of this is something that isn't going to go away. It's like a whole new market segment in video games. And so I believe that Nintendo's not going to abandon that market that they created. I do think that the Switch 2 will be a furtherance of this concept rather than, like a whole new concept to disrupt the games industry again. I think that they know that they've kind of caught lightning in a bottle with this, and they've got at least one more go at this. So I'm interested to see what that spells out for third parties. I do think that we've become accustomed to the idea of taking games wherever we want with fewer compromises than ever. And if Nintendo shortens that gap, narrows that gap between them and the PS5, it's only going to become a stronger draw, right? People are going to want this more from the games that we have available.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, you're right. There's no going back from this. We're only going to build from here on out. And I'm excited to see Nintendo platforms get more and more third parties that you would have at once thought would never happen. I mean, it's already happening to some extent. Like, we got games like Doom on Switch, and they run surprisingly well despite the compromises that they have to have. The Witcher 3, it might look like butt on Switch, but it plays well.
That's true. I reviewed The Witcher 3 and I was blown away by the fact that that game even exists on Switch. More so by the fact that it was done by Saber Interactive, which at that point was known for NBA Playgrounds and not a whole lot else. But before we jump back to the present, what's happening in the modern day, I do want to ask you this. What would your dream port be for like a Switch 2?
My dream port? Are we talking like a modern day game or something older?
A modern day game, like your pardon the pun, your miracle port for Switch 2, something that couldn't quite make it on the current Switch, but foreseeably could on a next generation version.
Before talking about Wilds, I would have said Wilds, because I just want Monster Hunter and Nintendo to keep having that relationship. But if I was going to peer outside of that a little bit, I might make some of the Sony crowd mad by saying this, but the first game that came to mind was Ghost of Tsushima for some reason.
Ooh, I like that idea. Ghost of Tsushima is an interesting one. I have the PC version, which means I've played it on Steam Deck, and I do really like that experience. The Steam Deck for me is the closest analog to like a PS Vita 2. So, because I can run most Sony first-party games on it. My Steam Deck has like Spider-Man 1 and Miles Morales, I was going to say 1 and 2, has Horizon on it, has God of War on it. And so it is kind of like having this PS5 Lite in my hands that I can just cozy up with these awesome Sony first-party games that traditionally didn't appear on other platforms. For me, playing them in handheld is more novel than playing them on a PC, like a desktop PC with a monitor, because when I want a big screen experience, I'll just play them on the PS5. But a handheld that can play all of these Sony first-party games is rad. And I mean, it'd be even crazier if it was on Nintendo. We'll get a taste of that with Lego Horizon, which is coming out this year. But
oh, right, yeah.
it's wild to think of a first party Sony IP appearing on the Switch, which we're getting this year. Crazy enough. For me, my dream port would be the Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy. I want those games on Switch. Rebirth it pushes the PS5 to its limits, in my opinion. But I do think that they could scale it to work on an upgraded version of the Switch. And I think Remake could certainly fit on the Switch. It was a PS4 game. So I would love to see those games make an appearance on Nintendo's platform. But I want to throw it back to the current day. It's nice to think about the Switch 2 and what could be. But the Switch 1 still has some life left in it. And we got a bunch of Splatoon news this week, a trio, if you will, of Splatoon stories. Nintendo pulled the trophy from the winning team and basically said that due to their conduct, they weren't going to honor them with the Splatoon 3 trophy, and they were going to vacate their victory. Based on what I've seen and heard, I don't want to go too far into it, but good.
They've made the right call. It's nice to see Nintendo being proactive about something like this, given the nature of what the members of Team Jackpot are accused of. It's just nice to see, because I think a previous era of Nintendo, this would have never happened.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I think that it was smart of them to distance themselves immediately and to make known that, you can't just go around doing what they were doing. Obviously, innocent until proven guilty, I understand, but there are receipts for days about this stuff.
Yeah.
And it's nasty. It's the kind of stuff that I don't want to mention on a podcast or anywhere really.
I
but
think
it's
doubly worth noting too, because when they won, a splash tag was added to the game with their team members on it.
Yep.
And that's being removed from the game, which is super funny.
It is. They got what they had coming. But of course, that's the minorest of news. We did get Amiibo apparently aren't dead. We've got the Squid Sisters, we've got Deep Cut, and we've got help me out here, Marina and Pearl coming
It's just the Squid Sisters and Off the Hook. Deep Cut's not getting a new set.
I'm sorry. Yeah, so we got the Squid Sisters and Off the Hook coming via Amiibo, and it looks like the last Splatfest, which ties into all this, is going to be all three Splatoon idol teams going up against each other for reasons. And if you don't know, Splatoon 3, or Splatoon, the series, their final Splatfest have massive implications for the series as a whole. The results of each final Splatfest to date have influenced the narrative of the game that comes after. So there are huge things at stake here for this final Splatfest.
I love that Nintendo has a game series that's doing something like this. This feels like something that Fortnite would do, right? But to have it in a first-party Nintendo franchise where a community-driven event drives the narrative of the series going forward. That's so cool. Even if, you could make the argument that they have concepts in mind for each result already, but then they just lean into one. Still, the community had a say in what happened. When Marie won Splatoon 1 Splatfest, it was Callie that went missing in Splatoon 2. Is that how it went?
Yes.
And then when Chaos won Splatoon 2's final Splatfest, that's why we're in Splatsville in Splatoon 3, because it is a chaotic kind of place. And then the losing option order is what inspired Splatoon 3's DLC.
Yep. I love that they have done this. I remember when Splatoon 2, I remember thinking oh man, Splatoon 1, Callie 1, that's interesting. Splatoon 2, I remember when they said order versus chaos and we all had that idea that we were going to influence the world of Splatoon 3. I went all in on chaos and I fought hard for that. And so when it won, I was super hyped because this is something that I wanted to see from the game and it was coming. And now knowing that we have these and seeing how far they've gone with this concept over the last two games gets me so excited for the idea that we're essentially fighting to draft the narrative of an eventual Splatoon 4. And That is just so cool.
And there's a couple elements here too. Like each team represents a period of time. So Squid Sisters is past, Off the Hook is present, and Deep Cut is future. So you might be playing for your idol team, which is what drives people to actually play the Splatfest. But then there's the past, present, and future of it all, which who knows what that could mean. We have no idea until Splatoon 4 eventually happens. But I was thinking about this, and this is the first time that we have 3 options in a Splatfest, a final Splatfest versus 2. So what do they do here? I was wondering if they throw a curveball and the last place team influences Splatoon 4's narrative.
Ooh, I wonder about that. And so I think that wouldn't be the right move. I think it's
No?
interesting, but I think it wouldn't be the right move. And here's why. I think that having the community fight for something and having the winners be the losers in the end would kind of be a sour experience. It would be a difficult pill to swallow. My thought is that with a, 3-way Splatfest, that you would have the winning 2 teams kind of take like a prized spot in the narrative of Splatoon 4. And perhaps, the third team, the losing team, needs to be rescued in the narrative of Splatoon 4. And so it's these, let's just say it's like Deep Cut and the Squid Sisters that win. They team up to help save Marina and Pearl Off the Hook. I for some reason Off the Hook is just not coming to me today, but having to save them or something to that effect. But I'll be curious to see. They always give you a little hint at what the narrative will be like when these Splatfests launch, but I will be there, splatter shot in hand, waiting to defend my choice. And I'll be honest, I'm on the fence because I love the Squid Sisters and Off the Hook almost equally. And it would be really hard for me to choose between them. I'm not sure where I'm leaning on that one. Have you made a decision in your mind who you're going to support?
I very clearly love Off the Hook more than the other 2 idol groups. Pearl and Marina have a dynamic that I just really, really like. You get to dig into it a lot in the Octo expansion and again in Side Order. So we've gotten the most time with Off the Hook, I think, between the 3 groups. They just have more going on from a narrative standpoint, so I just end up liking them more because of that.
That's a really good point.
I was thinking about the Splatfest even more, though. Like, Chaos did win the last one. So Chaos could influence the results of this Splatfest too. And I'm wondering what that could mean. That said, like if Past were to win, does that mean Splatoon 4, do we go back to Splatoon 1 in some way? Or if Future wins, does Splatoon 4 just take a wildly new approach? In my perfect world, Splatoon 4 is a wildly new experience because we've had 3 games of Splatoon and I'm ready to see how we can evolve that.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. There are some narrative hooks in Splatoon that could be really interesting when viewed from a future standpoint because they talk about the evolution of squids and the removal of humans from the gene pool, right?
Mm-hmm.
In that way, I'd almost like to see a past game if they talk about distant past, like before Splatoon 1. Like a Splatoon 0, if you will, in which maybe humans still exist in some way. But I do kind of want to see what happens in a far-flung future with Splatoon 4. So it does go beyond your 3 choices of idol groups and into something that is maybe a bit more meaningful and substantial. And I wonder how that's going to play out because obviously Splatoon 2 was kind of the same way as well, right? When you had that final Splatfest, it was about more than just Marina and Pearl. It was about order and chaos. And we obviously know what that means now. But I do kind of want to see a more futuristic take on Splatoon. And I agree that the 3 games, while they have their nuances and differences that are bigger than you may think, John actually did a video about that a long, long time ago on the channel, how much different the Splatoon games are from one another and how different Splatoon 1 is specifically. But I want to see something big. I want to see something from a gameplay standpoint that feels pardon the pun, feels fresh. I want something that takes the Splatoon series in a new direction because the 3 games, while they are different at their core, it's easy to see how people could kind of reduce them to being very similar.
It's also worth noting that this would be the third console generation that Splatoon has been on, assuming Splatoon 4 is a Switch successor game, which it almost certainly is. And, Splatoon 2 launched on Switch within the first few months of it being out, didn't it?
Yeah, it was a launch window game. I'd say it's appropriate to call it that. It came out, I want to say, within the first 90 days, maybe the first 6 months, but certainly shortly after the Switch came out, especially when you're talking about a console that's lived for 8 years at this point.
Yeah, I would not be surprised if Splatoon 4 is very early in the Switch successor's life, like first year, maybe even first few months. I think Splatoon 4 is closer than people might think. Um, I'm curious to see if it would be next year, because that feels like it'd be very, very soon.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like Switch 2 is probably closer than a lot of people think. I think that Switch 2 is within the first 6 months of next year. I don't necessarily believe that Splatoon 4 will be that soon. I would peg it as a year two title, assuming that the Switch successor comes out in 2025. I would think that this would come out in early to mid 2026. But it is weird to think about what a potential Switch 2 launch lineup looks like, because at this point there are plenty of candidates, right? I don't think that there's a 3D Zelda, but I do think there's a 3D Mario that's ready to go. I think that there's a potential Mario Kart successor because it's been over a decade since Mario Kart 8 came out. I think that Smash Ultimate is almost certainly getting like an improved port. You could say the same for a lot of Nintendo first party efforts, like a revamped Breath of the Wild, the mythic Twilight Princess and Wind Waker ports that we never got, stuff like that. So I think there's a lot of potential content to fill out a first year of the Switch. The only thing that I feel sure of is that it almost certainly starts with a 3D Mario.
Yeah, I agree. And I think Mario Kart is another one you want to get there quickly. But that's how I feel about Splatoon as well. Splatoon is so big in Japan that's going to drive sales for a new Switch or a new platform. And I don't think you want to wait for something like that. I remember Mario Kart 8 coming out, was it 2014? 2 years after the Wii U?
Yep.
That was awful. Like,
Yeah,
I
true.
think the Wii U would have had a very different story. Maybe not too different, but different enough to worth mentioning.
Yeah.
If Mario Kart had been there in the first year.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you on that. I think that Mario Kart is critical. Nintendo has kind of learned which of their franchises are key to establishing a platform's momentum. I think that's something they learned with the Wii U that they didn't have enough. It's a lesson they also learned with the GameCube, with having Luigi's Mansion, which is loved now, but was seen as kind of like an also ran before the GameCube released and people got their hands on it. And I think that deeply impacted Nintendo's or the public's perception of the GameCube. Obviously they hit the ground running with the Wii with a AAA Zelda right at launch. Same with the Switch. We got a AAA Zelda game right at launch, and I think that was important. I just questioned the timing on Splatoon because we're just now hearing about the end of support. And
Right.
if the Switch 2 is as close as we want it to be, is what I should say, then it feels like an awfully short window. But who knows? Like you said, maybe they've been working on Splatoon 4 longer than we think, in preparation for a Switch 2 launch. I could see either of those two being true, because it's not like Splatoon has been receiving rapid updates ever since it came out. It's been kind of, a slow and steady feed of new stuff.
Yeah, for this game they did seasons. So it was every 3 months there would be a substantial update, like 2 stages, a slew of new weapons, new gear. And I want to say that was slower than how it was done in Splatoon 1 and 2.
It feels like it. It definitely feels like it. But either way, I think that, we're this next year is such a interesting question mark for all of us, because we now know what Nintendo's doing for most of this year. I don't think that they're going to exceed this, cadence of a single game a month up through the end of the year. I'm not 100% on if they'll have a December game, or if they'll just be like, hey, our next platform is coming and here's what you need to know about it. So I'll be interested to see how this next year plays out. But I do think there's definitely a non-zero chance that Splatoon 4 is coming next year. For me personally, I'm holding my breath on that one, but we'll see. But before we close out the episode, Brandon, what do we have in our mailbag this week?
We have an interesting question from Fangs. How do you think the SAG-AFTRA strike is going to affect the rest of the year for games? So for those who don't know, SAG-AFTRA is the actors union. It is also the voice actors union, and they are making a move to strike for video games as of today.
Yeah, so this is an interesting topic because obviously, if you kind of know your history with strikes, specifically with strikes in terms of creative industries, there was a famously long strike in the television industry back when The Office was on the air that delayed the season for like a whole year. Obviously, voice recording is a huge part of the games industry, and these guys are striking because part of their contract has been updated to include the ability to capture their voice print to use in AI products in the future, which most people agree is not a good thing. Most
icky.
people don't want that because what do you need a voice actor for if they've already signed the rights to their voice away for you to replicate whenever you want to say whatever you want? And I agree with them. That's not okay. That's really gross. As for the impact it'll have on games, it's likely substantial, depending on how long the strike goes on, which we don't know, because obviously it has just begun as of the recording of this episode. But I think that they have to know that this is a wildly unpopular choice, and it is not the hill to choose to die on because it's bad optics. It is nearly indefensible, and the people who would defend it are generally very weird and on the wrong side.
Going back to the question specifically asking about 2024, I don't think this has much of an impact on 2024 at all, if I'm being honest. Most games that are going to require voice acting very, very likely have already done so, especially if you're talking about union jobs, because that's going to be a lot of AAA type stuff. That stuff's probably all done. We're not really going to start seeing the effects of this, I don't think, until next year. Correct me if I'm wrong. There was also a video game actor strike back when the first Death Stranding was being made.
Yes.
And that held that game up for a long time. So I expect it to have implications in the future, just nothing in the immediate moment.
Yeah, like you said, it's worth noting that voice acting typically gets done earlier than you think in a game's production process. So, games that are coming out through the rest of this year likely have their voice work done. And also, like you mentioned, Brandon, you're talking about kind of the higher budgetary end of the gaming sphere. You and John have both appeared in games. Both of you are actively working on games. John had a trailer for a game he's working on come out today in Cat Quest 3. And obviously, I don't believe either of you are members of a voice actors union just yet.
I am not. I am eligible for NAVA, I think it's called. Also worth noting that SAG-AFTRA isn't technically a union. It's specifically a guild. There is a distinction there. But they're working to do the same thing. So, semantics and whatever. But no, to be eligible for SAG-AFTRA, you have to have done, I think, at least 2 union jobs, I want to say, before you can even apply. And I have not done a union job before, and I don't know about John, but it would be different for him anyway, since he's in the UK.
Yeah, it's an interesting place to be in, but the point I was driving at is that we're talking about, bigger AAA, like you said, high budget titles. Smaller indie games or even medium-sized games are often just contracting out to individual voice actors because union jobs, frankly, are probably much more expensive. And that's great for the voice talent, but not every studio has pockets that deep, right? And I'm just happy to see you and John in any video game. So any game where I can hear you guys is a good game in my book. But this is so I think you'll see this more on like the scale of like Sony and Nintendo and bigger publisher games being impacted. Your indies are probably going to be safe.
I was going to mention, in the case of Nintendo, I'm pretty sure they specifically do not use union talent.
Oh, that's a
Yeah, it's not a good look, right?
no.
Because I want to say that the actors who were in Kid Icarus Uprising on 3DS are union actors. And there's been a discussion that because they're union actors is one of the reasons we have not heard from them in a game like that since. I could be wrong about that. I don't want to be wrong. So if I am wrong, please leave a comment. Let us know. But yeah, I'm fairly certain Nintendo specifically does not use union talent, which, boo.
Yeah, not a great look. But yeah, hopefully that answers your question. Thank you so much for submitting that. Quick reminder, if you would like to submit questions to us, you can join our winners circle over at patreon.com/gvgaming, where for as little as $5 a month, you get access to our exclusive Discord, and you can submit mailbag topics for us to answer, as well as getting access to these episodes a day early.
So we have another question from Feeling Dreepy. And they ask, considering that Nintendo has in the last year alone remade Metroid Prime and The Thousand Year Door, do you think there are any other games that are likely to get remade or remastered from the GameCube or even Wii generation in the near future? Metroid Prime 2 and 3 seem pretty likely. Yeah, I think so. I think remakes and remasters are just something Nintendo always have in their back pocket. That's just a card they can play whenever they need to. I think games like The Thousand Year Door, Super Mario RPG, Mario vs. Donkey Kong, Metroid Prime, these are games that were done for a long time, and they were just waiting for the right moment to release them in their calendar.
Oh, absolutely. Considering the sheer quality of Nintendo's back catalog, it's the amount of restraint they've shown is nuts. When you think about how hyped people would get if Super Mario World got a brand new remake, in with modern visuals, people would go crazy. Ocarina of Time, if we got a console, like a full on 4K or HD remake of Ocarina of Time, I'd lose my mind. The fact that Nintendo knows they can print this money whenever they want and they choose not to is speaks to the fact that they've got some pretty good cooler heads prevail over there. Because they could have inundated us with remakes of all these older games whenever they want. But I think Nintendo has learned over multiple console generations that these are good things to hold off on for when you really need them. And that is something that is smart because the Switch hasn't had the GameCube or N64 era content gaps that they've learned to avoid. And I think that these remakes are part of that strategy. When they know that they need something that is comparatively, and I use comparatively as doing some heavy lifting over here, comparatively lower effort, they can remake a game and bring that out for us and fill in those schedule gaps. I think, Nintendo World Championships is a great recent example of a game that exists to fill a content gap. Not to say those games are any less fun than any other titles Nintendo's putting out, but I think it's smart that they avoid the perception that they're just not having content coming out for their console. And that's where some of these things fit in. But I would say anything, there's nothing really off the table because Nintendo has such a huge back catalog to pull from that they could announce a remake of anything at any time and people would buy it. So I think Metroid Prime 2 and 3 are really good candidates considering the upcoming release of 4. But beyond that, I can't specifically nail one down. I would say Twilight Princess HD and Wind Waker HD, maybe a Majora's Mask or an Ocarina of Time, considering there's a very low chance of a brand new Zelda, a brand new 3D Zelda coming out after Echoes of Wisdom. I think we're years off from that still.
Yeah, I agree. I think, honestly, next year after Echoes of Wisdom is probably a good time for them to finally take out those Twilight Princess and Wind Waker ports. Assuming that they don't have anything else cooking, because Echoes of Wisdom, while I was expecting a 2D Zelda soon because we didn't know what Grezzo was doing, it did kind of come very quickly after Tears of the Kingdom, which is worth noting. Having a quick content cycle for a series like Zelda is nice when we have historically not had that. But going back to the broader topic, like remasters and ports for Nintendo, I think it's also something that they don't just poop one out, Like, they are being strategic about which games that they go after. Like Super Mario RPG, Paper Mario, The Thousand Year Door were two very strategic choices that they made when it came to games that they were remaking. So I think not only are they banking a lot of these, they're also being careful about which ones they put their time into. The Thousand Year Door was a great choice given, the hunger from Paper Mario fans. Super Mario RPG, a treasured Super Nintendo game that wasn't available on Switch yet, and is so old, that a remake made sense. But they're not going out of their way like to remake Donkey Kong Country Returns, right? They ported Donkey Kong Country Returns, which is a very different conversation. I think games like that might be a little less valuable than a remake or remaster. Or valuable is not the right word, just like an effort, I guess. Something that they're not expecting to make a lot of money, but does serve to just fill the calendar out. Overall, I think Nintendo's very strategic about which ones they've been choosing because you're not seeing a lot of complaining. And I feel like a Wii U era Nintendo would have gotten nothing but flack for certain remakes like these if they were all we were getting.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that Nintendo doing this not when they're on the back foot is really important. I think that when they have kind of the advantage of positive consumer perception helps how these games are received because people are largely happy with the Switch. People like the Switch a lot, and you can't argue against the Switch library. It's an unwinnable argument.
Mm-hmm.
There's thousands of games, and Nintendo has put out some of the best titles they've ever made in this generation. So when they do go back to the well, it doesn't feel like they're doing it to make a quick buck off the back of nostalgic customers. It feels instead that they're just enhancing an already great console's game selection. And so I think that that's invaluable in kind of, there's that whole concept we talked about in the first episode about value proposition and how people view a game in the context of when and how it's released. And I think that with remakes and remasters, you engage in that conversation all over again because you have people, if you're doing it on a console where you're offering little else, then people are going to feel as though they're just being milked for cash. But when you do it on a console where you've routinely released some of your highest quality products, it just feels as like a compliment to those games that you love on that platform already.
A game I've wanted to revisit, and I say revisit, but it's not entirely accurate. I've never played it before, is Metroid Prime Federation Force, which famously got tons and tons of hate when it was first announced because it was a 3DS game. It was not a numbered Metroid Prime. It was a multiplayer game. People were like, this isn't a real Metroid Prime game, blah, 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 blah. But now we live in a world where Metroid Prime 1 got an excellent remaster. Metroid Prime 4 has a trailer. We know it's coming out. I think if Metroid Prime Federation Force released for the first time right now, it would have gotten a much more positive reception.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that that's something I experienced when I went back to Luigi's Mansion 2 in a post Luigi's Mansion 3 world. I found that it was delightful. And that was something that I missed out on the first time because of kind of the vibe surrounding Luigi's Mansion when that game came out. And now that I kind of have a different context in which to view it, I found what there is to love in that game. And it's true that the same could be true of Federation Force. I know for a fact, one thing that moved me, and I feel bad about it, but, back at GX, we used to talk smack about Federation Force, and one of the developers of that game reached out to me and expressed how sad they were about how critical reception was for that game, and that despite it being widely viewed as a not very good title, that the team put a lot of love and effort into it. And that really made me rethink how I talked about that game publicly, because knowing that some people worked so hard on this thing and that it was a labor of love for them, I can't imagine, I know when I put a lot of effort into a video and it doesn't go well, it's gutting. It sucks.
It hurts.
It hurts because it's something, I never make a video just to make a video. I make it because it's something I want to talk about. And I can't imagine protracting that effort on something so much bigger over years and years of my life and then just having it be completely panned. I know an infinitesimal amount of what that must feel like. And so I just can't imagine how bad the people who worked on that game must feel, or who work on any game that just kind of becomes the butt of a joke, right?
And it's especially true when a game like Federation Force is largely criticized for what it isn't rather than what it is. Like, oh, this isn't a core Metroid Prime game. This is a 3DS game. Multiplayer, yeah. But like, the same thing happened to Triforce Heroes, and I've been very public about how much I love that game for a variety of reasons. I'm glad that John also feels that way. I don't feel so alone anymore. But it's frustrating too, because like, the game is being unfairly judged. It's not being judged on its merit. It's being judged on completely like unrelated metrics.
Yeah, and that is something that I think, unfortunately, it's hard to avoid in the moment. It's hard
Yeah.
to avoid those feelings in the context of a release that disappoints fans of a franchise. But it is nice to go back and review those games and find what it is about them, when you have the benefit of hindsight. And that's something that I try to do more often. Federation Force is certainly a game that I have long intended to revisit and actually take a look at. I did play it and it didn't land for me when it came out, but there was a lot of issues surrounding that game at the time that have since been resolved through the benefit of additional games coming out. So, I don't know. I'm going to try to be better about that. I know that it's not going to be something that I'm always on the right side of, but it is nice to consider, those creators that work on those games and how tough it must be for them to get that kind of feedback. Not saying that it's never warranted. There are certainly cases where it is. There are lots and lots of bad games out there, but I do want to give Federation Force another shot. With that, though, I think we're at the end of today's episode of the Week in Nintendo podcast. The reception to this show, just on a personal note, has been great so far. I appreciate all of you that come watch us on YouTube or listen to us on podcast services all over the world. I just want to remind you that this goes live on YouTube and on podcast services 9 a.m. Pacific time Saturdays. But if you want to get it a full day early, Fridays at 9 a.m., you can join our winner's circle at patreon.com/GVgaming. Thank you all so much for listening, for hanging out with us. I hope you're happy, safe, and healthy wherever you are. And we'll see you next week. Bye now.
Bye.